Ahojte milí druháci, pozdravujem vás 11. mája na výročie víťazstva slovenských hokejistov na majstrovstvách sveta v roku 2002. Neviem ešte dnešný deň, možno na pozajtra, možno zajtra budeme vedieť, či bude Štiavnický okres podľa semaforu v ktorej covidovej fáze a podľa toho sa určí, či prídete do škôl, ale všetko sa zdá, že asi aj internát bude pripravený a aj vy budete sa môcť vrátiť. Každopádne ja toto ešte som v tejto chvíli, keď to nahrávam, neviem. No a preto vám nahrávam ďalšiu hodinu dopredu a uvidíme, či ju použijeme, alebo už sme spolu boli, alebo budeme, alebo už akokoľvek. Dobre, v podstate budeme pokračovať s ďalšou témou, ktorú máme na chatu, a to sú Vikingovia. Pôjdeme už len na posledných pár slajdov, ktoré tam máme. Ja vám po Dánoch a Nóroch vám dnes porozprávam o Švédoch, alebo tzv. Variagoch, ako ich prezývali Rusi a východní Slovania. No a pôjdeme už potom na tú veľkú prezentáciu, ktorú tam máme, kde si vám aspoň ukážem, vlastne ako tí Vikingov som tam vycucol. Začneme ďalšiu tému, a to je stredoveká kultúra, a ja vám aspoň symbolicky prebehnem poznámky, ktoré sú vo Worde, pretože sú rozpísané. Totižto v tej veľkej prezentácii je tá téma o stredovekej kultúre tak spravená tak veľmi, veľmi stručne a skôr na takú vašu samostatnú prácu. No a na toto bohužiaľ asi nemáme nejako priestor, alebo teraz možnosti, keďže neviem, kedy sa vrátite, inak by sa vám to dalo ako povinnú domácu úlohu za bonusové jednotky. No, toto však teraz nebudeme takto riešiť, takže ja vám to prebehnem a v podstate, aby ste mali predstavu, čo tie jednotlivé pojmy potom znamenajú. Dobre? OK, samozrejme, tak ako vždy, tak musíte reagovať na otázky, ktoré som vám zadal. Minulý týždeň som sa vás teda pýtal na také všeobecné veci o Vikingoch. Netuším, čo sa vás pýtam ešte ďalšie, uvidíme, takže tak. Dobre, na čím má obrázok, by som mal Sandre povedať, nech ho už zmení, nech nejaký nový nakreslí. Dobre, so I think that we can move on. Vikings or Norsemen, and according to the names of these guys, you remember that probably it's better to use the word Norseman, or just to call them according to the actual contemporary current names of the countries in here. And the third from the countries we haven't mentioned yet, after Danes and Norwegians, are Swedes. As you realize, when I was giving some introduction in Slovak, I call them also with this name Varangians or Variags by Slavic people, Eastern Slavs, East Slavs in Russia. The reason is that there was interesting connection between the rise of medieval states of Kievan Rus and principalities around that were connected with arrival of Viking or Swedish Vikings. Actually, even the word Rus, it's got Norse or Nordic origin, and it means like red-haired people that Vikings were. They were not so blonde as you could think. The thing is that places they are called Rus, where the places where in Vikings came, established some states called Russian states, Rus, White Rus, Red Rus, Carpathian Rus, and Small Rus or Great Rus, and so on. Not Rus, but Rus. That's why there is this apostrophe in here. Okay, these guys called Variags by Slavs, but they themselves called Rus or Russians. So it's interesting thing that actually name Russian is completely different. It's like Sweden in here. In this painting from 19th century of like L'Art Nouveau style of Russian painter depicts arrival of merchants, not of warriors, but of merchants coming in here. The reason is, actually, in my opinion, that the Vikings could raid. They raided, they plundered. In case they couldn't do that they clashed with a too powerful enemy, so they preferred trade, business, and in case they gained some lands, so also they settled down. Of course, you know these things, how they got assimilated in Francia, in Normandy, in England, or in Italy, and of course on these ways they accepted Christian faith. Here around the Baltic states, because Swedes, just like in Norwegians and Danes, were sailing far over the seas, but Swedes had a problem that here there were people called Sami, one of the original populations of Northern Europe, then Finns and Estonians, who were these Ugro-Finnic peoples living in this northern part of Russia today and Baltic. Then Balt or Baltic people that are actually very close with language to Slavic and to Germanic peoples like Latvians and Lithuanians, at that time also Prussians, alebo Prusy, and also Slavic people, and probably they were plundering them. Also the first scene from the first episode from the Vikings TV show depicts how they're fighting somewhere against maybe Latvians or Lithuanians. We don't know why or how. I mentioned that in Estonia there was some unsuccessful raid already in the 8th century, but since the beginning or the end of the 9th century, Swedish Vikings called Varjaks start to arrive on their ships as merchants, not as tradesmen and not as warriors, and they started trade with the Slavic principalities of East Slavs in here, for example in the rampart of Ladoga, south on the river Neva, Novgorod, Nizhny Novgorod, and further on. What they created was that in these towns they started to trade with timber, with honey, with wax, with meat, with furs. That was a very important thing, and iron and slaves especially. What they realized was that actually they were probably very, how to say, efficient, useful for locals, for local Slavic people. So they allowed them to settle in these towns and established kind of like merchant fortified neighborhoods or quarters. So in both of these towns, in Ladoga and Novgorod, they had this kind of merchant fortresses. And obviously during some battles among these states and principalities, they joined these forces of locals, and they proved to be excellent warriors with this mentality of their souls going to Valhalla and so on. So just like in case of merchant Samo in the Samo state, even these guys were offered actually control about the city to become the princes in here. So just like in Ladoga, even in Novgorod, they became like the leaders of the town, like princes. Among them, there were guys who were called like Rurik, and he became one of the first founders of these principalities, and his sons and grandsons were named like Ingvar, but later called Igor, Olaf, later called Oleg. And there was interesting transition that where Vikings or these Norsemen came, so they got assimilated very quickly as merchants or settlers or farmers, and they adopted the language. So let's say the second, third generation probably could not speak Nordic language, and they were speaking this East Slavic language. Despite even their names were changed, they adopted not paganism, but later on Christianity. So they actually start to speak. But somebody asked them, "Who are you from?" And they are from Novgorod. So you are from the land of Russians, of Rus, because Russians, Rus, thus Swedes or Varangians, as Slavs call them. Well, so they started called all these states, principalities that had some connection of ruling houses and settlements of Vikings, Russians. So that's why we can find Russians near Novgorod, Russians in the south like Kiev and Rus, and Russians even on the borders. Like my father, I said that he was Rusin. And the case is that here around, in this case, around along this trade route between the Baltic Sea and the Black Sea, they created a huge grand duchy, huge principality, What was the reason? Because Ladoga, Novgorod became very rich, so Vikings started to explore, and sailing against the stream of these big rivers on the plains, they realized that even pretty close from now small and shallow rivers, only like 20 or 50 kilometers from there is another big river. It was just enough to pulled the ship from on the shore, on the bank of the river, and across the meadows, or cutting down the trees and rolling the ship, pulling ship on the rolling trunks of the trees. They could actually pull it like 50 kilometers to the river Dnieper or Pripyat, and from here, when there was water deep enough, they could land, pull the ship back to another river, and sail down, flow down the river Dnieper to the Black Sea, and they got to the territories of Byzantine Empire. So in this way, not only they started up their trade routes, established new principalities, but actually created like trade route between Byzantine Empire and Scandinavia. In Russian language, now I mean the Slavic Russian, they started to call this trade route Izvariak Kugreki, which means from the Varangians to the Greeks, from Sweden to Byzantines, from Swedes to Byzantines to Greeks. And they start to develop especially two cities, two ramparts, and that was Novgorod, Nizhny Novgorod, and Kiev. And here, they establish actually, centralized power, and they start to attach more and more territories around, created big grand duchy in here. So that's why another picture from the 19th century, probably from a school history course book, of Russian Tsardom, where they depict like mythical arrival of Rurik and his company, which is interesting that they actually have Viking axes that were long, and they will come by Russians looking from like 18th century maybe, but they believe like they were these guys. But as I said, just like in England, in Normandy, in Italy, they got very quickly assimilated. What else? Again, like in many other countries, they turned out to be excellent warriors. And when they start to trade with Byzantine Empire, again, they firstly tried to attack them. Already at the beginning of the 10th century, Constantinople was besieged by 100,000 Russians, as they call them. We don't know how many were Vikings, how many were East Slavs. Probably it was impossible for 100,000, 50,000 men to come from Scandinavia, so probably they were only Russians, East Slavic people led by Vikings or the descendants of Vikings. But they call like this Russians. And again, just like any other time, Byzantines successfully defended using this Greek fire. They set their ships on fire. What remained, and now Swedes turned into like more peaceful relationship, and they started to be hired as bodyguards, personal guardians of Byzantine emperors. And because money for them was more important than like corruption, so they proved to be like I would say traditional guardians of Byzantine emperors. Just like with the popes, they had Swiss guardians from Switzerland. So this is happening here. So Varangian bodyguards guarding the Byzantine emperor in here in Constantinople. Okay, what to mention, guys? Because it's real difficult to go out to make this final conclusion. As I mentioned that. Vikings gradually settled down, and I decided to give you a couple of pictures that may be interesting, because I gave a question about any Viking stuff that you know, and even from pop culture. And for me, for example, as history boy, that was like great to see, to watch. Probably it will be really slow. For example, reenactors that were the only guys that I saw that they have like realistic clothing and weapons and so on. This was only pictures in here from the reenactment group of Vikings from Bratislava called Vargar, and they were doing this living history. So it's very different from the pictures that you may know from Vikings TV show, but this is how they actually look like, and it was a bit different. Okay, so even clothing style, and weapons, berserk, famous like front line warriors, only to scare people, but usually they died too soon, so they had to eat some mushroom to be like with hallucinogenic mushrooms to be like different style. Okay, Cool stuff. Okay, let it be. This is really old one, probably one of my first videos said in the PowerPoint presentation. But what I wanted to show you that there are many things that recommended the Vikings, but not anymore. Maybe these first two seasons looked actually pretty accurate, but later on they were really different, and you'll see some more pictures. Something more about real Vikings, about reenactors, and the ship burials. Come on, come on, come on. It would be in here, maybe. Yeah, it doesn't work anymore, but it seems that it's not going to work at all in here. Yeah, because we need also two letters. Now it should work right now. Okay, so I have to update the links for this. So what's the point is that you may find like a real different thing. Even these bonus tasks were a bit different, like when was Christianity adopted by Vikings? And this TV show is actually main motive that Christianity is coming here and replacing this old pagan religion, paganism, Nordic paganism, which until today was preserved only like fairy tales. And even like Tolkien's, General Tolkien, use it as kind of a fairy tale at the beginning. Even The Hobbit was even written like for the kids. It was not like dark Silmarillion and so on. Okay, even like some Nordic script or clothes were different in here. Okay, but many things come in here. Days of weeks, for example, Nordic origin, Thursday in English. And what was Kalmar Union? This is probably the ultimate thing coming in here that I show you in the big presentation, and how Vikings changed from Vikings guys without horns, of course, into something like this. This is beautiful painting of a Danish painter from 19th century, I believe, that depicts scene in Visby in Götaland, that is Swedish island in the middle of the Baltic Sea, Gotland. Visby is one of the UNESCO towns today, and how King of Denmark, Valdemar IV, is picking up hostage, it means tribute from the people, Swedes of in here. But are they Vikings? No, it's no difference between like Hungarian, Slovakian town of, let's say, Štiavnica, Zvolen, Bystrica, or French towns or German or Swedish towns. But something that is coming in here, I'm going to tell you about soon, and that was medieval culture that became like unifying for Europe for a couple of centuries. Kalmar Union was actually the state that was created in High Middle Ages and late Middle Ages, which was union under the Danish rule of Sweden and Denmark, because at the time Swedes were ruling in Finland too, Denmark was ruling in Norway and thus in Iceland and thus in Greenland. So that was the only time when Scandinavia was united, even including non-Germanic Finns in here. Actually, they didn't survive, and Denmark and Sweden had divorce like Czechoslovakia. But that was a state that was Christian, with Christian kings and very important Christian tradition. They were using this flag of Denmark, using in here in the Kalmar Union. That's why all these Scandinavian flags look like the same, like Scandinavian cross. Okay, but very different. And this is if you remember the cartoon I wanted to show you, is that how Vikings changed. And when I saw this, I told to myself, like, this is excellent. This is ultimate result of it. Like each feed is like nice, like travelers, tourism, stereotype cartoons, and so on. And a British person in Norway. So, how do you feel about your violent, bloodthirsty Viking past? Some Norwegian, let's say. Well, actually, the most adventurous and violent Vikings left Scandinavia and settled in places like Britain. We are mostly the farmers who stayed behind, like piece of farm. So I guess you guys are the real Vikings, and now British changing into bloodthirsty Viking. And that's actually, in my opinion, very true. Those who were violent were being banished, like Eric the Red from Norway to Iceland, even from Iceland to Greenland. And guys who were more adventurous traveled to Italy and Francia and Normandy, and all of them they got assimilated. And those who stayed there, they accepted Christian faith and established this new kingdom of Kalmar Union. And because like living in cold climate means like that you cannot rely only on yourself but also on the help of the others. They became much more tolerant. Okay guys, so that was January 12, 2012, but I move to the next presentation. Yeah, to the presentation, check out the time too. 20 minutes, okay, I've got this shift of 20 minutes for each topic, so sorry for that. And I show this presentation, just revision. So all the Word, Microsoft Word notes are in here, and they are extracted and put in this presentation. So we started Viking, moved to culture, and later on to all the states in here. So studying materials, you saw that, and Vikings is the first chapter. So you know all the pictures, and I told you all the thing about their origin, about the names they used, about division of the countries, or like tribal unions maybe, but it seems to be quite a linguistic differences that make three main changes of the sea between Denmark and Sweden and Norway, and then mountain ranges between Norway and Sweden, you know. So Pippi the Longstrumpf probably speaks different language than some trolls in Bergen or Lego makers in Copenhagen, you know. As I said, they were mostly farmers, merchants, but even raiders in this period of 2-3 centuries when they organized these, not pirate, but raiding raids. You got a video by John Green, something that we didn't have, we could have had at the lessons, and I will definitely watch this about Vikings in here, but slow internet does not allow us to watch it. This was nice poster from National Geographic from this chapter that I've shown you like some moments ago, and depicts like how Viking ships look like, but even how farmers look like somewhere maybe in Scandinavia, maybe Greenland or Iceland, but here in Russia. So Kievan Rus, as you see, not only Kalmar Union and these like Viking principalities in here in Western Europe, but even all these principalities of Kievan Rus, and already their clothing was a bit different, inspired by locals, you know, with kaftan, typical coat of East Slavic people in these regions. Okay, about culture, I told you everything, the same things. What I didn't mention was maybe these gods. They were elves, dwarves, and humans, and afterworld in Valhalla, all thing in Iceland. I think I mentioned all of these stuff in here, and conquests and expeditions. And this is something that I didn't mention. That in the TV show they mentioned how they got navigated in the seas. Since they didn't have compass, was just simple bucket with water, and they laid a wooden plate with a needle in the middle, and the shape of the needle was showing the direction for the sun. But when the sun was not shining because it was cloudy, so they start to carry this quartz mineral. You know, quartz is kremen, and thanks to special rays that are being broken in the quartz, you can actually look at it in a dark sky, and you can actually see where the sun is. And when you know that you are in the northern hemisphere, you have really accurate direction in the seas, where you flow to the west, to the south, to the north, and so on. So that was a nice thing that was in here. Okay, about Danish explorations, I told you about this invasion to England, even to establishment of Normandy, and even Italian Normans. Norwegians with their conquest of Far East Iceland, settling in Greenland, and even discovery in Vinland in America, which was actually true in Lonzo Meadows, and Swedes that I have told you today is in here. Again, 2 pictures, 2 videos, probably the same, maybe better working than before. Yeah, this is nice. There is one guy, this Patrick Animation, you can find him over the Facebook, and sometimes he does some historical movies, especially this Viking series with my favorite actress Lagerta. Actually, she's Ukrainian originally, and how she looked like in the movie and in the TV show, and how she should have looked like according to archaeology. Yeah, when I ask you about some pop culture stuff, you know, Mr. Bean, and this is probably the best cartoon I've seen. With Sun is bothering you, Bjorn Son, son of Bjorn. Again, this is my favorite painting from Visby, Kalmar Union, and HFE that you've seen. Okay, guys, let's move on to medieval culture. Actually, there are many things in here about this, and I'm not sure if I can pass all of them. What I want to show you is probably that I'm going to show this word notes, but the notes in the presentation that you have in here are just general things about literacy. That's like not education, but literacy. That because language is always the means of spreading the culture. The language you use, you think, you use, you understand, you read, you listen to the people, you reproduce the ideas, and it's very different if you think also in English or if you think in Slovak or in Chinese, for example, or Japanese. The other things connected with this that who spread it, the language that was mainly Latin language was actually Christianity, and the head of Christianity in Europe was definitely the Pope, who created not only the state but kind of institution that was so influential that you could find similar features even from monasteries to universities and even to architecture or music and clothing, from Portugal to I don't know, Finland, and from Ireland to Romania, okay, from Italy across Slovakia to Norway, and it was really almost the same, only maybe local conditions caused that there was different stone used in architecture and so on. So Latin, papacy, čiže pápežstvo, heresy as kind of like a fight, but you will see development of Christianity, čiže kacírstvo, but even monastic orders and so on. If we were at the lesson, I would definitely give you this compulsory task with explaining these terms. Despite I'm not going to mention them in the notes, I want you to pass through it because it will be either in your assignment or in the test. So that's why to understand from lingua franca rose studium generale to stained glass and 7 liberal arts, 7 slobodných umení. Okay, I check out this video from YouTube. What is it about? Because since I didn't write The Secret of Kells trailer about beautiful book, but it's going to be at a different lesson about Ireland. Okay, so I will open these notes that I extracted. Don't worry, guys. I just make it closer. Okay, like this. And I will go through the notes and you may understand. So the point of this chapter is that before I moved to England, France, Bohemia, Kalmar Union, or Hungary, Kingdom of Hungary, Middle Ages, there were some things happen in this between early and high Middle Ages that made Europe really more united than before, and maybe coming back to the ideas of Charles the Great. First was that Latin language actually spread it within Western and Central and Northern and Southern Europe elsewhere. Not only that it was communication language since the times of Roman Empire and the fall of Roman Empire, but it remained the language of the apostles of St. Peter and St. Paul. And you know that St. Peter, according to legends, if you don't know, you will know it one day, but apostles was one of the apostles that moved to Rome, and here he started to spread these words of Jesus in Latin language, so Romans and people in West Roman Empire could understand it, whereas St. Paul was spreading it in Greek language in East Roman Empire, thus Byzantine. So that meant that in Western Europe, Franks, even Vikings, were using Latin language just like we use English. Since the time they started to call this language lingua franca, the language of Franks, which is not Germanic or French, but it is Latin. But it was not symbolic of the language of Franks, but language of Europeans. Because Franks were called any white Europeans, any Christians, by Arabs, by Jews. So even like Viking or Great Moravian was the same Frank for them because he was white and he was a Christian. So that's why all the documents within the church and thus also in kingdoms and principalities all around the Europe, apart from these Byzantine Rite, were used in Latin. Of course, here it was Greek predominantly, but even you know the Great Moravia case that Prince Svetopluk he banished the students the students of Methodius after his death, and they moved to Latin, right? Not to Glagolika, not to Cyrillic alphabet. So that's why even Poland or, for example, Croatia adopted Latin right only under the conquest of Hungarians, of Magyars. So this was interesting case, and thanks to Latin, you can understand all the documents within all the Europe, and that's why it's really important. And if you want to study history, just like we had 3 semesters of Latin language at the university. So of course we don't know much about it, but that's one part of it. Okay, I can probably leave it from here. So in these pictures, it's symbolical that Jesus handing over the keys from the gate of heaven, from the heaven's door to the Peter, who became like the founder of ecclesia in Latin, which we call today church. Church is not only the building, the temple, but church is organization of believers. And how can believers pick up what is true, what is wrong, and how they should praise the God and Jesus is that those wiser would tell them, those wiser should have read the Bible and the texts of apostles. For that case, they use Latin language, and they start to call this guy like Saint Peter and his, later on the heads of this first church of Rome, the bishop. The bishop is sometimes like the kind of like leader, but also they start to call him in Latin Papa, the father of the Christian or Catholic Church. So in this case, he organized bishops, archbishops, and spreading Christianity all over the Europe in early and late Middle Ages, and thus Latin spread it again even to Scandinavia, to Moravia, Slovakia, to Portugal, and so on. In this case, only monks and clerics, thus, bishops, friars, parish priests, and so on, could read and write. Which most people were illiterate, which is actually not true, for example, for Kievan Rus, for Novgorod, because people here were using Glagolic alphabet, they could understand it very easily, and they use it for everyday correspondence. And even love letters sign up on the birch skin trees remain. Like, this was really interesting. These guys, like first bishops of Rome, turned out to be the popes, and this is what I was talking about with the papacy, papastvo. So St. Peter established Christian church in Rome, became the first bishop of Rome, of the father of Roman Catholic Church, as it is called, like Papa or the Pope. Actually, they created, thanks with help of Normans from Normandy, he established the state that was protected by Francia, later East Francia, later by German Empire. It was accepted by all countries because only the Pope was like messenger from the God who could give the crown to the prince and proclaim him the king, like the king of Poland and Hungary. Before that they had been princes, So for that reason, somehow popes managed to keep the so-called papal state, Papežský štát, which was actually real feudal state with its own territory and army and economy, but instead of the king, they had the Pope. They had their own mercenaries, they had their own coats of arms, and they were fighting. And because they were given, like popes were given a lot of gold as gifts and so on, donations, so later on they decided not to keep their own army of mercenaries, but only mercenaries, the best mercenaries in Europe, and they were from Switzerland. In this presentation, I will be speaking about medieval Switzerland, about the creation of this country, and how the Swiss were probably the best fighting forces of Middle Ages, maybe even today. And it became tradition that popes even today had bodyguards and agents, and not only ceremonial Swiss guards. They must speak Italian to talk to people, but they must be Roman Catholics, logically, of course. Okay, so the Pope, what did he do? What were his tasks? So Pope appointed bishops and archbishops in various countries. These guys later on divided their countries into bishoprics and abbeys, and these guys appointed friars and parish priests to villages and cities, and in this way they spread Christian faith. So that was spreading of Christian faith that we know, it's called Christianization. The other thing is that they summoned councils, which is easy to understand because council znamená rada, zhromaždenie rada, we know like town councils, but in this case it is like clergy council or church council. Toto voláme po slovensky koncil alebo cirkevný koncil a je to zhromaždenie vysokého kléru, čiže biskupov a arcibiskupov. So this gathering of high clergy was happening sometimes when the Pope summoned it, when he needed to talk about, to explain some Christian dogmas. Dogma is religious belief. So I mean, for example, let's use the Bible. Moses was talking to God. Was he a prophet? And let's talk and let's make one agreement that it will spread in, and it will write it down in the Bible, in the footnotes. To čo 20 ste písali poznámky počiarov. So in this way. Or Virgin Mary, mother of Jesus. Was she a virgin or not? Jesus, was he a son of God or of Holy Spirit? Or what was that? Thus, Jesus, was he a God, demigod, or a human? In this way. So there are many things that they were actually analyzing, and not all the time it was according to the words of Jesus that were mentioned in these evangeliums, but it was sometimes according to the will of the Pope. And the popes, as the monarchs, as the feudals, they had their own ambitions and aspirations. Still, nevertheless, they were the most powerful guys within Europe. So instead of spreading Christianity, they also later on organized crusades, či krížové výpravy, we will talk about this. They also established Inquisition, that was kind of like special court law of courts that was about religious issues and could decide whether these guys could be like heathens, či pohani, pagans, or heretics, či kacíri, heresy, kacírstvo. Please never confuse heathen or pagan with a heretic. Heretic, kacír, is believer, Christian, that disrespect these dogmas accepted in council. For example, Jan Hus didn't want to accept that there is purgatory, the same for Martin Luther. They were proclaimed heretics, but they were Catholics. They were Christians. Since heathens or pagans were people believing in polytheistic religions like of Perun and Thor and so on, and against them there were these crusades or inquisitions and so on. Still, heresy was an interesting phenomenon of the Middle Ages because these changes in Christianity caused that many people wanted to come back to the roots, like these Hussites, for example, or Cathars or Albigans. Actually, Albigans and Cathars too in France were really crazy because they came to the beginning that people should be like Adam and Eve, because this couple were without sins at the beginning, but they were running around the Garden of Eden naked, so they got like undressed and they met in the woods like wildlings, and of course probably there was some like sodomy and so on. So that was like terrible crusade against those people, but still there were kind of independent changes within Christianity, or a witchcraft, because they believed, of course, that there were some witches living around. Okay, check the time, guys. 23 minutes. Cool. Many heretic movements in Europe, because there are many of them. Definitely one of old like sect of hermits, sekta pustovníkov, Bogomils in Bulgaria. Very famous, these guys, Albigans and Cathars in France. Those who are interested in French history or this kind of religious or heretic history, I would definitely recommend to read some books about it, because it's extremely interesting how it was. They had their own councils in southern France. In the 14th century, there was the professor of the Oxford University, John Wycliffe, who was reading original texts of the Bible in Greek, and he realized there are big changes during like 1,000 years since like the publishing maybe of the ideas of Jesus, and they're very different. There is no purgatory, očistec. There are no indulgences, odpustky. There's actually very big equality among the people. And how he ended up, he was burnt at stake in England. His ideas, nevertheless, spread it around Europe, and among the guys who listened to them and started preaching was another teacher at the university in Prague, in Karolus University, Jan Hus. And Jan Hus established, he was also burnt at stake in Switzerland, but his ideas had been so influential that whole kingdom of Bohemia turned to so-called Hussite movement, and it was big attempt for reformation of the church that actually was later repeated by Martin Luther with the Reformation 1 century later. And these Hussites in Bohemia are probably the most influential heretic movement that was actually successful because Hussites survived within so-called Moravian churches or Czech Brethren churches. What else about papacy? Of course, you see this papal state sometimes was spreading all around central Italy. And what else? So there were some important milestones of papacy. I picked up this great Pope Gregory the Great, who made like big reforms and changes in the church and established the organization as we know it. Not only that, he introduced the Gregorian chant. Maybe we can listen to it someday, and not now, right now, but also he introduced new calendar because at the time people had been using Roman calendar that was last time introduced by Gaius Julius Caesar, and that's why we have these Roman names of months. But Gregory the Great, he realized one thing, that there was actually a shift in the time when there was Easter holiday and the spring was actually over, or winter, and it didn't set out with the beginning of winter. So he introduced new calendar that they realized is not, that 1 year does not last like for these years for like 365 days, but even some hours more, and that's why every 4th year must have 1 day extra. So, and actually every century 1 or 2 days extra, 1 week whole extra. Actually, not this Gregory, but Gregory the 13th, I believe, in the Middle Ages changed it, so it was a bit later. So I just erase it. Okay, the other thing was that, for example, if you remember Charles the Great, when he invaded northern Italy, so he proposed the Pope Leo the 10th kind of unification of his Frankish Empire and Holy Seat, čiže Sveta Stolica, ako ho voláme. And on Christmas year 800, he coronated Charlemagne, Holy Roman Empire, and thus the bounds to Holy Roman Empire or the Germany were created. The other things with Great Schism, we already know about banishing Patriarcha of Constantinople and Pope of Rome each other, so there is some video about this. The other things that I want you to understand and listen in here are these things. The first in 1077, so-called the Investiture controversy, vidíte, že po slovensky som tu dal, boj o investitúru, hlavne pre tých z vás, čo chcete študovať, teda dejiny, ale aj pre ostatných kvôli písomke. It was actually conflict between German Emperor Heinrich IV, who decided that it's a good thing to have his own bishops in Germany that would not be spies for the Pope or for the French or any other country, but for himself. So he started to appoint bishops in Germany according to his own will. What Pope could do, that was again Leo XIII, was that he banished him from the church, and he just sent him the letter. Now, Heinrich, your Majesty Heinrich IV, I banish you, excommunicate you from the Church of Holy Seat of Roman Catholic Church. You're not Christian anymore, and thus your vassals are not obliged to follow the oath of loyalty for you. What did it mean? Of course, he just threw the letter somewhere away. But people heard about this because the messengers of the Pope were all around, they were speaking loud. And suddenly the dukes and princes who were under the emperor, if you remember the pyramid of society, so they stopped obeying him. They stopped sending him money from taxations. They stopped sending him army for the battles. And suddenly, eventually, Heinrich IV, he realized that he had no power, because he lost it with only one single letter sent from the Pope, who is the spokesman of the God, of the God's will. And that was a moment in which he realized that not the emperor, not like any lord, can be more powerful than leader of the main religion that explain that explains whole system of life and hierarchy of Middle Ages and situation. Because if we disrespect it, it can fall apart, back to anarchy or coming to revolutions, what actually later on happened. When Heinrich realized it, so he sent a couple of letters to the Pope that he actually realized his mistake and he made up his mind and he wants his power back. He wanted his power back. For which the Pope refused him and said, now you are not nobody. You are nothing to me. If you want to come and speak to me, you have to come like you are. Come as you are. And not Nirvana, Kurt Cobain, but the Popes, come as you are like a beggar. So, as a kind of asking for forgiveness, begging for forgiveness, forgive me, Heinrich IV, he was traveling by foot from Germany across the Alps, coming to northern Italy to the castle called Canossa, in northern Italy, where the mistress of the Pope dwelled, and he spent some months in this castle, not in Rome. At the time, there was no even celibacy of the priests. So popes, it was common thing, they had wives and mistresses and lovers, and for that reason even they refused to divide this, inherit this state, because otherwise children of the Pope could divide it. So this is a moment, this is a picture where Heinrich IV is coming to the Pope for asking for forgiveness. Even before this scene, he had been waiting for 3 days at the gate of Canossa in the rain and snow like a beggar, shaking. And then Lao invited him. Okay, Louis, so did you suffer like Jesus? Do you understand what's the God's will? Who has the power? Right now, he did. That's why this situation, this event is well known as the Canossa walk, alebo cesta do Canosy. Keď idete na cestu do Canosy, idete za pani riaditeľkou prosiť o odpustenie, že ste rozbili niečo, alebo obcikali niečo, alebo ste nacikali na záchodov nejakú vec. Čiže prosíte o odpustenie, idem do Canosy, idem niekoho prosiť o odpustenie. Okay, another interesting situation. Actually, I didn't mention this, but I have to add one thing, and that is Concordate of Worms. Concordate of Worms was final agreement between the Pope and the German Emperor that only the Pope has the right to appoint bishops and archbishops. Neviem, či si pamätáte, ale spýtate sa, ak ste katolíci, na kauzu trnavského biskupa Roberta Bezáka, ktorého jeho vlastní veriaci chceli udržať, ale v podstate sa sťažovali slovenskí biskupy, arcibiskupy ostatní, tak jednoducho pápež ho odvolal. Neskôrší pápež potom to oľutovali, sa mu ako ospravedlnili, ale to bolo všetko. A v podstate sa ukázalo, že ani štát, ani veriaci nemôžu zasahovať do toho, kto je biskupom alebo arcibiskupom v ktorej diecéze. A o tomto rozhoduje jedine pápež. Wormský konkordát. Worms s malým V sú červíky, ale s veľkým V je mesto Worms v Nemecku, veľmi dôležité. Čiže concordate actually is a treaty about concordia, which means agreement, čiže taká zmluva svornosti. Tieto konkordáty budeme poznať asi 3-4 z dejín a posledný s Napoleon Bonapartem. A vlastne posledný máme to Vatikánska zmluva. Okay, what else? Another event in here is so-called Avignon Papacy. This is English name that they don't mind so much, but because Slovakia has been Catholic country predominantly, so we call it Avignonské zajatie pápežov, like popes were kidnapped and imprisoned somewhere. Actually, they were not kidnapped at all, but they were just moved and they agreed, maybe violently, we don't know, but later popes were okay with this. What happened? We will learn in 14th century there was a king, very powerful king of France called Philip IV the Fair, Philip IV Pekný. The better name, nicer name, worse character you have, or worse rumors about the king. This was one of the most cruel king, one of the cruelest kings of France. He was actually very powerful. He conquered large lands around. He invaded also Italy, and he believed that the Pope in Rome, when his army got to Rome, that the Pope can proclaim him the emperor just like Germans. But the Pope refused. So he just decided, now, Pope, why dwell in Rome? I shall take you to Avignon, to France, and you'll be the Pope in France. Why in Italy? What's the point of it? We are more powerful than Romans. So in this way, he just moved the papal residence from this angel castle, Castello in Rome. That was not this square, but it was this castle, to Avignon, to this beautiful Gothic palace in Avignon. And here, these popes were actually the servants of the King of France, and later on. Of course, Germans, Hungarians, the English, the Kalmar Union, all of these, they refused this Pope staying in France. So they decided there must be a new council held, and all the bishops and archbishops in Rome elected a new Pope. So for that reason, new Pope was elected, and they start to actually fight. Sometimes in open warfare, sometimes in kind of disputes, discussions. But the thing is that there were two popes at once, and another one was later elected, but the previous popes refused to resign. So that's why we talk about double papacy, alebo dvojpápežstvo. Actually, it lasted for almost 20 years. And in the council in Constance, where Jan Hus was burned at stake. So the main reason for this council meeting was to solve this problem. And when they elected this third one, so two previous refused to resign. So there was a moment, and why Hussite movement was so successful, that you have three messengers of God. One in Rome, another in Rome, and one in Avignon. So where is really God? Here, is he almighty, or are these people representatives of God? Probably not. They only fight for power. So that's why what I want to show you, this Council of Constance, Kostnický Council in Switzerland, that where Emperor and King of Hungary, Sigismund Luxemburg, for us very important, ended this period election new pope, but they waited until the previous two died. Okay, I got only 9 minutes, so I just go through these. The other phenomena, because Pope was respected from Portugal to Finland, from Ireland to Croatia, and just like Latin was used in documents in here, in all of Europe, the same thing, that same monasteries could be found from Ireland, Portugal to Croatia and Finland. This is the thing, that monasticizmus, alebo kláštory, is another phenomena of Middle Ages in Western and Central Europe. It started with some Christian priests realized that living in these beautiful palaces among the popes and court ladies is probably too sinful. So they decided to repeat life of early. Sorry for that. I need to interrupt the lesson, guys. I'm sorry, I'm back, guys. I had an important phone call. So what I was talking about was that some priests, some of these Christian priests, just refused to live life among the nobles. So they decided to abandon urban areas. Urban areas znamená mestské oblasti, and they lived a life of a hermit. Hermit znamená pustovník. It's a guy who lives alone in some remote places, very often in some cave or small log cabin in the woods. He doesn't eat a lot. He lives like ascetic life, like Buddha or priests from Hinduism. And they believe that this kind of suffering and simple life will bring some holiness to their soul and bring them closer to God, because living like easy life is not something deliberating, because you become lazy and spoiled. But Jesus was suffering in the cross, and they believe that this suffering will bring humility and modesty, for just like for Jesus, or just like for Buddha. Actually, this is really like similar things, similar ideas. Still, these people like Saint Benedict of Nursia or Saint Svorat in Zobor in here became really famous, and people from surroundings, they were coming to meet with them and to pray with them and being given blessing, just like Jesus came to see the John the Baptizer, young Krstitelj, because he was living also this ascetic life, and he promoted like this is something that is worthy to follow. This lifestyle inspired the church to establish actually whole communities of monks, mníchov, that lived similar life of these guys. Actually, the first one was called Benedictines because of the name of Saint Benedict of Norcidia, who was the founder. Next important are Dominicans, according to Saint Dominic, and then Franciscans from 13th century. What was interesting, already Benedictines were actually widely supported by landlords and kings and emperors, and they're giving all lands where they could build their own places and so on. And not only places, many of them entered these monasteries, kláštory, mnížské rády, monastic orders, only to have like fine life, because when you were given land, it means that you were given also peasants. And when you are given peasants, you are given feudum, you are given food, you are given timber, you are given gold. And you can build not churches, but you can build whole monasteries or whole complexes of buildings, and huge ones. And that's why you can live this life in luxury, yeah, pretending sometimes that you are like praying and working, ora et labora, speak and work. It means pray and work, but they were not working so much. Especially Dominicans were the wealthiest order, and they were settling only in the towns and places where there were rich people living, like in Banská Štiavnica. You know, our school has the beginning in the 13th century, in 1238 or 1275 actually, when Dominicans were coming back to Banská Štiavnica, and they were asking the mayor of Štiavnica, of Šemnic, to give them back their lands and their church and their monastery, because town was becoming rich again, and they want to have money, you know, from that. So also, it's not surprised that they were also main members of the Inquisition in here. So that's not the reason that there were many people who criticized these Dominicans compared to ascetic Saint Benedict and Benedictines. In this very simple black, Dominicans are black and white, and that's why in the 13th century it was a big surprise that the Pope approved the existence of one poor order that was very similar to Hussites, to Reformation, and also to some heretic movements, and that was Franciscans. Franciscans were established by Saint Francis of Assisi, that probably you all know, very popular here in Banská Štiavnica because of school, but they actually asked for the poverty of the church. Even they themselves decided not to have any monasteries, any big monasteries. They only were living in small houses, and they were helping the poor, helping the sick. It was a very big difference to Dominicans. And even Martin Luther, he was actually a member of Dominican order, and he saw how wealthy they were, how they abused the power and wealth they had, and he moved to St. Franciscans. Couple of times in Middle Ages there were councils in which Dominicans proposed that Franciscans should be abolished and they should be proclaimed heretics. Actually, one of a few orders, they still survive in the form of Capucines in here. Okay, let's check the time. Okay, 2 minutes. In monasteries, when kings provided them some land, so they built these monasteries in here, and because not only churches were there, but there were actually many buildings where monks lived according to special strict orders. They were called regula, or regulations. Also, they established some more buildings that were like centers of education, where they kept libraries with books, and especially they themselves were the people who kept the culture. They knew the languages, so they were rewriting books into more modern, more stable form. They were translating texts and so on. This was happening scriptorium, scribere, it means to write, and these monks were translating books, rewriting, and decorating them with beautiful illuminated manuscripts, which means like decorated handwritings. Manus, this is manus, scribere, it is to write. So in this like handwritten books with illustrated letters and pages that sometimes were as expensive as a whole castle, you know. Some of these orders, especially Franciscans, they also established hospitals next to monasteries or in the towns, and monks took care of the sick. And you know, from the medicine, the leper was very common. In here, many diseases, people are dying of variola, of tuberculosis, and especially since the 13th century of the epidemic of bubonic plague called the Black plague. And all the pictures depicting here, some, not monk, but probably some shaman, local or elder man trying to cure them with something. But four riders of the apocalypse dancing on the graves of people in here. And spreading of bubonic plague is actually interesting in these times of epidemic or pandemic, that countries that started lockdown, like Archduchy of Milan or the Kingdom of Navarra or the city of Brooks in here, that they actually avoided the epidemic killing. All countries that didn't have so much trade in here, King of Poland closed the borders, so the plague didn't spread so much. People wearing masks, wearing gloves, sticks not to touch the people. People today refusing to wear masks inside interiors are stupid in this way. Probably I don't have more time. Yeah, I do not have more time to speak about universities. That would be last two, together with architecture, last topics I believe already at school, guys. So not like this plague doctor from Middle Ages. I believe that you'll be safe and you'll enjoy long life. So live long and prosper. So stay negative in tests, guys, since tests are not important. So be positive in mind, guys. And I hope to see you soon. Bye bye.